Welcome to the land of wood and water, known to the Taino as Xaymaca, or as the English like to call it, Jamaica. Xaymaca means land of wood and water. The Taino farmed cassava, fished, and invented hammocks. Jamaica is a Caribbean island nation located in the Greater Antilles and the third largest island in the Caribbean, after Cuba and Hispaniola, just south of Cuba and west of Hispaniola. In 1494, Columbus claimed Jamaica for Spain, but the island had no gold. The Spanish shrugged and settled for enslaving people instead. Disease and violence wiped out most of the Taínos within a generation. Between 1509 to 1655, the Spanish brought Africans to replace the dying Taino population. Many escaped to the hills, forming Maroon communities. From there, they raided plantations and built free villages in the mountains. Some early Africans in Spanish Jamaica may have been black Moors from Iberia, but the majority were enslaved West Africans brought directly through the transatlantic trade. These early Africans helped form the roots of Maroon communities once the Spanish lost control. The Spanish used cimarron to mean escaped enslaved Africans who fled into the mountains. Originally, it meant wild or untamed, applied to runaway livestock that went back into the hills. In the 1600s, French speakers shortened cimarron to marron, same meaning, runaway, wild. Since France and Spain were both all over the Caribbean, the term spread. The English borrowed it as maroon. In 1655, the English invaded and kicked out the Spanish. They renamed the island Jamaica, meaning land of wood and water. The Maroons called it land where we keep embarrassing empires. Unlike some Caribbean islands renamed completely, like Hispaniola or Puerto Rico, Jamaica kept its original Taino name. After the English seized Jamaica in 1655, they turned Port Royal into the busiest port in the Caribbean and the wildest. Merchants, pirates, and privateers drank, gambled, and fought in the streets. It was called the wickedest city on earth. Then, in 1692, the earth itself had enough. A massive earthquake struck, turning solid ground into quicksand. In minutes, 2/3 of Port Royal sank into the ocean. Over 2,000 people vanished beneath the waves. Port Royal went from wickedest city on earth to the Caribbean's most exclusive underwater resort, overnight. Between 1600 to 1700, sugar became the island's gold. Plantations spread like wildfire, fueled by the brutal labor of enslaved Africans. But resistance was constant. Poisonings, slowdowns, and sabotage. The British planters and the members of the militia were becoming more aggressive towards the Maroons. Some of the rebel slaves disappeared into the mountains and joined the Maroon communities. The Maroons were communities of Africans who escaped slavery during the Spanish and later British rule. They set up free villages deep in the mountains and forests of Jamaica. Think of them as freedom fighters with the best natural fortress, steep hills, dense bush, and hidden trails only they knew. They weren't just hiding, they were raiding plantations, freeing other enslaved people and making life difficult for colonial authorities. Basically, they were living proof that slavery could be resisted. As the Maroon population grew, the Jamaican government decided to defeat the Maroons once and for all. They were seen as a constant threat by the government. In 1728 to 1739/40, the Maroon War begins. The Maroons, led in the west by Cudjoe and in the east by Queen Nanny, fought Britain for over a decade. Guerrilla warfare from the hills left redcoats dizzy and mosquito-bitten. Britain thought they were fighting one rebellion. Instead, they got a 2-for-1 deal. Cudjoe in the west with his treaties, and Queen Nanny in the east with her ambushes. Talk about a buy one get one nightmare. Cudjoe was more of the political military negotiator. His base was in Trelawney Town. Cudjoe signed the paperwork when Britain finally threw in the towel. Queen Nanny was legendary for her guerrilla tactics and spiritual aura. Both names became immortal, so sometimes they're mentioned as if they led the same side, but really they led two different halves of the same struggle. In the end, Britain signed peace treaties. Maroons got land, Britain got peace, sort of. In 1760, an Akan chief named Tacky led one of the largest Caribbean uprisings. Enslaved people seized plantations and fought for months before it was crushed. His name became legend. Tacky, leader of the rebellion, was originally from the Fante ethnic group in West Africa and had been a paramount chief in Aguafo in the central region of present-day Ghana. As king, Tacky recalled selling prisoners of war of his rivals of the Ashanti, Nzima, and Ahanta off into slavery as spoils of war to British slave traders, before himself taken captive by the Dutch when a rival state, and the Dutch defeated his army in battle near Elmina and sold him into slavery, and he ended up in Jamaica. He and his lieutenants planned to take over Jamaica from the British and to create a free and independent state. In April 1760, Tacky and about 100 other enslaved men who all had extensive military training stormed a plantation, killed the overseers, and seized firearms. They captured plantations and gathered followers, swelling to hundreds. After several days of rebellion in St. Mary, Tacky and his fighters retreated into the hills. The British, frustrated by their failure to crush the uprising, called in the Maroons, who by treaty 1739/1740 were obliged to fight against future rebellions. A Maroon marksman reportedly shot and killed Tacky. His head was cut off, placed on a pole, and displayed in Spanish Town as a warning. It was the British, not the Maroons, who cut off Tacky's head and stuck it on a pole. This was a common colonial practice to terrorize the enslaved population after rebellions. In Europe and the colonies, displaying severed heads or bodies was a way to terrorize the public. Example, in England, traitors' heads were stuck on London Bridge for centuries. In Jamaica, rebels' bodies were often displayed after execution, hanged, gibbeted, caged in irons, or heads placed on poles. The British used this tactic widely after slave uprisings to scare others from joining future revolts. After Tacky's death, the revolt didn't die. Other rebel groups carried on in Westmoreland, Clarendon, and St. James. For months, rebel groups fought the British militia and Maroons, who were forced by treaty to fight against them. By early 1761, the revolt was fully crushed after brutal reprisals. Between 1780 to 1786, Dutty Boukman, a key figure in the early stages of the Haitian Revolution, 1791, Boukman was originally enslaved in Jamaica during his youth before being sold to Saint-Domingue, now Haiti. It's highly likely he knew of the Jamaican rebellions, especially Tacky's, as it was recent history during his lifetime. These events would have been part of the oral history and revolutionary consciousness among enslaved Africans. They helped shape a legacy of resistance that Boukman drew upon in sparking the Haitian Revolution. In 1791, Dutty Boukman himself was a voodoo priest, started the Haitian Revolution, and this worried the British about slaves uprising in Jamaica. The Maroons' existence were seen as a constant threat by the government. In 1795 to 1796, by this time tension grew again. The British accused the Trelawney Town Maroons in western Jamaica of breaking treaty terms. Small disputes spiraled into war, starting the Second Maroon War. The Maroons waged another campaign of ambushes and raids. The British brought in over 5,000 soldiers and even bloodhounds from Cuba. Despite this, the Maroons resisted fiercely. Despite fighting bravely, they were eventually forced to surrender. After months of stalemate, they agreed to surrender in December 1795 under the promise of pardon and return to their lands. The Maroons eventually negotiated, but the British betrayed them. The British decided they were too dangerous to keep in Jamaica. About 550 Trelawney Maroons were tricked by the British in 1796, promised pardon if they surrendered, then accused of breaking the deal, rounded up and deported to Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. It was a mix of broken promises and outright deception. The British thought, if we can't beat them, we'll ship them where it snows. That's like sending island warriors to shovel driveways in Canada. Talk about cruel and unusual punishment. Life there was harsh. Freezing winters, a nightmare for people from tropical mountains, poor treatment and broken promises by the British. Within a few years, the Maroons were demanding relocation. They were misled into thinking it was a temporary exile or resettlement, not a permanent removal. In 1800, the British shipped the same group of Maroons from Nova Scotia to Sierra Leone, West Africa. There they joined the colony of formerly enslaved Africans from Britain and North America. Other Maroon groups remained in Jamaica, keeping their treaties. In 1831, Baptist deacon Sam Sharpe led 60,000 enslaved people in a Christmas strike turned rebellion. Sharpe organized a peaceful general strike for better working conditions and wages. When the strike was ignored, it turned into full-scale rebellion. About 60,000 enslaved people joined, the largest uprising in Jamaica's history. Cane fields and plantations burned across the island. The British crushed it violently. Over 200 rebels were killed in battle and 300 plus executed afterward, including Sam Sharpe. The rebellion shocked Britain. News of the scale and brutality helped push Parliament toward abolishing slavery in 1834. Freedom came in 1834, full emancipation in 1838, but wages were tiny, famines hit, and hurricanes wrecked crops. The chains were gone, but poverty and injustice remained. In 1845, after slavery was abolished in the British Caribbean colonies, the plantation economy needed a new source of labor. Former enslaved Africans had gained their freedom and were no longer willing to work under the same oppressive conditions. The abolition left a massive labor vacuum, and there was a real concern that the sugar, coffee, and other plantation industries would collapse without sufficient workers. The British looked for a solution that could ensure cheap and reliable labor without the costs of slavery or the social upheaval of granting full citizenship or rights to former slaves. The British chose India and China as the primary sources of indentured labor because they were large, impoverished populations that could be mobilized for labor. Many Indians and Chinese saw the indenture system as a way to escape economic hardship. The British were able to tap into this large pool of potential workers who were often desperate for work. While Indians were often used in agricultural work, the British preferred to use Chinese laborers in other industries like mining, railroad construction, and urban labor. Despite early tensions, over the decades, relationships began to change. Some intermarriage occurred, especially between Chinese men and African women, as there were few Chinese women brought to the island. Many descendants of Indian, Chinese, and African heritage intermingled, creating new mixed-race communities. In 1865, preacher Paul Bogle and politician George William Gordon, a mixed-race politician sympathetic to the poor, led the Morant Bay Rebellion against injustice. In October 1865, a man was dragged into court in St. Thomas Parish on a petty land charge. To the people, it was not just one man's case, it was proof that the system was rigged against them. A Baptist deacon named Paul Bogle from the village of Stony Gut had had enough. He gathered his neighbors and said, "Justice does not live in the courthouse. Let us go there and bring it ourselves." On October 11th, Bogle led hundreds of men and women to the Morant Bay courthouse. Their march was not only for land, it was for dignity. When the militia opened fire on the crowd, killing several, the marchers turned fury into flame. The courthouse was set ablaze, officials attacked, and the rebellion began. For days, the rebels controlled the parish. They struck at plantations and symbols of colonial rule. They had no cannons, no armies, just courage and cutlasses. But courage alone was no match for an empire. The British executed hundreds, including Bogle and Gordon. George William Gordon was also arrested illegally and executed. Brutal, but it lit the path towards self-rule. The governor thought Jamaicans would accept freedom without land or justice. Paul Bogle marched to remind him, "Freedom without fairness is just another plantation." In 1914, a skilled speaker, printer, and journalist named Marcus Garvey founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association. From early on, he noticed how deeply racism and colonialism shaped the lives of Black people worldwide. His message? Black pride, self-reliance, and unity across the world. From Harlem to Kingston, his words carried like drumbeats across the diaspora. In 1929, Garvey founded the People's Political Party, the island's first. He demanded land reform, better wages, and schools, radical ideas in a colony built on inequality. Garvey's voice faded by the 1930s, but his message grew louder in the hands of others. Strikes, riots, and protests erupted across Jamaica. Out of the fire rose new leaders, Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley, who carried the march toward independence. In the 1930s, labor unrest shook the island again. Out of strikes rose leaders, Bustamante, fiery and bold, Manley, calm and strategic. Together, they built unions and political parties, pushing Britain toward independence. Bustamante gave the speeches, Manley drew the blueprints. Britain realized they were outnumbered by brains and ballots. On August 6, 1962, Jamaica became the first country in the Caribbean to gain independence from British colonial rule. From Queen Nanny's mountains to Sam Sharpe's gallows, from Bogle's march to Bustamante's rallies, Jamaica's story is one of struggle, survival, and triumph. The Maroons kept their autonomy for centuries and still maintain unique communities in Jamaica today, like Moortown, Accompong, and Charlestown. The Maroons proved that enslaved and free Africans could outsmart and outfight an empire.